Season's greetings, everybody. Or should I say, season's bleedings. That was terrible. I apologize for that. Also, I need to apologize for my terrible sounding voice. I'm currently getting over a cold, and I've been waiting to record the audio for this video for a while, but I'm honestly running out of time, so I just decided to record the audio even though I sound horrible. So please forgive me for that. And as usual with these lists, I love having a wide variety of different horror subgenres, including slashers, creature features, psychological, found footage, anthology, and paranormal hauntings. None of these movies are in any kind of order, but number one is definitely my personal favorite. Now, with all that being said, let's begin our list. Barricade. A father and his two children plan on having a fun family Christmas vacation at a secluded cabin in the woods, but it quickly turns into a fight for survival against a raging blizzard and a sinister presence. So this was actually a really great movie, and I'm surprised that more people don't know about it. This film is very, very similar to The Lodge, but not extremely depressing like that film is, and this movie actually has likable characters. This is a mixture between supernatural and psychological horror, and it actually has some very scary, well executed jump scares. And the three main actors in this movie do a fantastic job. I usually hate child actors, especially in horror films, because they either always come across as annoying or they can't act at all. But everyone in this film did a terrific job. This film also has some very nice cinematography and a beautiful snowy landscape. The cabin is also very cozy and is covered in lots of Christmas decorations. This is a really eerie and ominous movie, with a very M. Night Shyamalan type of twist ending. So if you're in the mood for an ominous Christmas movie that will make you afraid, then I recommend watching Barricade. Christmas Blood. Two detectives desperately search for an escaped serial killer dressed as Santa Claus, who's targeting a house full of women on Christmas Eve. So Christmas Blood is a Norwegian film, and normally I don't watch foreign films because I'm lazy and I don't like having to read subtitles the whole time. But I had heard about this film years ago and thought it looked really great, but I didn't want to watch it because I wasn't in the mood to read subtitles. But this year I finally said enough is enough. I'm not putting it off anymore. I'm finally gonna sit down and watch this movie. And I can confidently say it was well worth the wait, because this movie is incredible. First thing I want to say about this film is that it's equal parts detective movie and slasher film. It's almost like a Christmas version of John Carpenter's Halloween. You have a killer who got shot 5 times and somehow survived. He got locked up but has now escaped and is going after a group of friends spending Christmas together. There's even a psychologist at the beginning of this film, and when he's talking about the killer, he literally says, he is the manifestation of ultimate evilness. Another film this kind of reminded me of was 30 Days of Night, solely because of the fact that the location that the girls are staying in is Norway. And since it's December, the sun doesn't rise at all. So most of this film takes primarily in the darkness, which creates a very eerie, dim atmosphere. And the thing that makes this movie stand out and makes it so special compared to other Santa slasher films is that it's a very dark, gritty, serious movie. Most Santa slashers have a lot of comedy or campiness in them. Even if they aren't necessarily a horror comedy, there's always a decent amount of humor sprinkled throughout the film. But this movie is dead serious. The Santa Claus killer isn't just some random guy who started killing people. He's a full-fledged serial killer who has murdered hundreds of people. So he will not show any remorse or hold back at all. He murders a child in the opening scene of this movie. So fair warning if that's too dark for you, but the kills in this movie are insanely gruesome and violent. I know some people might not be into that because it's too real for them, but I personally loved how dark it was. And I think it's refreshing after watching so many Santa slashers that go for a comedic style. It's just really nice to see a hardcore, realistic, dark, gritty Santa killer. And the last 45 minutes of this movie is an absolute bloodbath. Another part of this movie that I really enjoyed is the group of friends having a reunion together and celebrating Christmas. They honestly reminded me a lot of the girls from Black Christmas, and I'm not sure if that was intentional or just a coincidence, but either way, I really enjoyed it. Also, this film is extremely snowy and Christmassy. Like I said earlier, this film takes place in Norway, so it's constantly snowing, and since it's always dark outside, the whole town is only lit up by the streetlights and the Christmas lights, and it's very moody and atmospheric. So if you've been looking for more Christmas horror movies, but so far all the ones you've watched have been duds, this is one that will not disappoint. So I highly recommend checking out Christmas Blood. Await further instructions. A dysfunctional family awakens on Christmas morning to discover they've been sealed inside their house by a mysterious black substance, and there's a message on the television that reads, "Stay indoors and await further instructions." So this movie actually kind of reminded me of Silent Night from 2021. You have the whole toxic, dysfunctional family element, as well as the possible inevitable ending of the world. But the part that reminded me the most of Silent Night was the constant back and forth between the family, debating on what to do, and whether or not they should blindly follow instructions or trust their instincts. There's also a science fiction element in this movie that I didn't expect, but I found it very fascinating. This film isn't very gory, but it does have some body horror near the end, and that was really disturbing. This film is also more Christmassy than I expected, featuring Christmas songs and Christmas decorations throughout the whole film. So if you love holiday horror films featuring family dysfunction, then I recommend watching Await Further Instructions. Holiday Hell. A woman enters an antique store looking for a last-minute Christmas gift and meets a mysterious shopkeeper who tells her the horrific stories behind 4 different objects. So obviously, this is a holiday-themed horror anthology, and at first I was hesitant to include this film on my list because besides Christmas, it also has a Valentine's Day story and a Hanukkah story as well. But it has 2 different Christmas stories, plus the wraparound story takes place on the day before Christmas Eve. So altogether, that's 3 different Christmas stories. So in my opinion, this movie focuses mainly on Christmas. The first story is called Dollface, and it's about a group of friends who sneak into an abandoned house with a dark past on Valentine's Day. This story was a pretty typical cliché slasher, but it has some really cool kills, and I also really loved the design of the killer's mask. The second story is called The Hand That Rocks the Dreidel, and it's about a young boy who receives a very old and rare doll from his parents for a Hanukkah gift, right before they leave him alone for the weekend with his suspicious babysitter. This is a pretty standard child's play type of story with a killer doll, but I thought the doll itself had a very memorable design, and this segment also had some pretty funny jokes as well. The third story, titled Christmas Carnage, is my personal favorite, and it's about a family man who always gets the short end of the stick. He tries his best to keep everyone around him happy, even though they basically treat him like crap and walk all over him. But while he's dressed up as Santa Claus for his company Christmas party, something happens that causes him to finally snap. This story is a lot of fun. You feel bad for the guy because everyone around him treats him so terribly, so when people start getting killed, it's very satisfying and entertaining to watch. Stories about killer Santas are always fun, but there was just something special about this one in particular. It had a great balance of fun and campy, but also somewhat realistic, so I definitely enjoyed this one the most. And the fourth and final story, which also takes place around Christmas time, is called Room to Let. And I have to be very vague while describing this one, because I don't want to spoil it, but it's about a girl who moves to a small town after her mother passes away. But the people in town seem very strange and suspicious. The fourth story also ties into the wraparound story as well. And let me just say, the ending of this movie has an awesome twist. The wraparound story as a whole is probably my second favorite part about this film. My first favorite being Christmas Carnage. Antique stores are always cool and creepy, and I love the concept of each item in the store having a disturbing story behind it. I also loved the interactions between the two main characters. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's more than meets the eye with these two people. And although it might not seem like much at first, story-wise, slowly but surely, you become more intrigued and invested in watching the story unfold. So if you want a fun, festive anthology to watch after wrapping presents and listening to jingle bells, then I recommend checking out Holiday Hell. Decoys. When two college students try to lose their virginities, one of them begins to suspect that the girls on campus are behind a string of bizarre murders. I know the poster for this movie looks terrible, but don't judge a book by its cover, because I actually really enjoyed this movie. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm going to keep my review kind of vague, but I will say this is a sci-fi creature feature, and the special effects were surprisingly good, especially considering this movie came out in the early 2000s. People get frozen to death several times in this film, and it looks really creepy. I think the filmmakers copied the face from The Ring, because the characters who get frozen have a very similar facial expression when they die. And it's also pretty obvious that this movie came out in the early 2000s because all of the music on the soundtrack sounds very similar to Blink-182 and Fall Out Boy. This film takes place during December, so it's constantly snowing. The college even has an Ice Queen beauty pageant. Plus, there's red and green Christmas lights throughout the whole film, and the climax takes place on Christmas. This film had funny, likable characters, great special effects, and beautiful snowy scenery. So if you're looking for a fun, cheesy creature feature that will bring you Christmas joy, then I recommend watching Decoys. Santa Stein. When Max was 6 years old, he accidentally killed Santa Claus. 12 years later, Max attempts to rectify his mistake by resurrecting him. But he soon realizes the creature he created is a bloodthirsty monster, and it's headed right to the big high school Christmas party. So this movie might sound ridiculous, but it's honestly a lot of fun. Santa Claus mixed with Frankenstein is actually a genius idea. And I'm surprised that with how many Santa slasher films exist, nobody's ever come up with this idea until now. This movie is a little low budget, but I couldn't really tell for the most part, besides the lightning effects when Santa Stein is created. But besides that, everything looked really good. Especially the kills. The kills in this movie are incredible and very creative. My personal favorite is when one of the characters licks a telephone pole, obviously copying A Christmas Story. But in this version, the dude gets his tongue ripped completely out of his mouth, and then Santa crams an apple down his throat. And then, of course, we get a classic Christmas horror kill involving Christmas lights. Because, let's face it, no Christmas slasher is complete without someone getting hung or strangled to death with Christmas lights. I also appreciated that this film doesn't take itself too seriously. And that's not to say it's a full-on comedy or anything like that. Yes, there is some humor sprinkled throughout the film, but I think it's the perfect balance of being serious when it needs to be and being comedic at the right moments as well. Overall, this movie was a blast. It's a great twist on the cliche Santa slasher genre, with great creative kills, likable characters, an original story, and of course, tons of Christmas cheer. So if you're looking for a fun, creative slasher film to watch around Christmas time, then I recommend watching Santa Stein. Shredder. When seven snowboarders break into an abandoned ski lodge for a weekend of partying and shredding the slopes, they soon find themselves stalked by a psychotic killer who plans to put them all on ice. So this movie is basically like Friday the 13th, but in a snowy environment around Christmas time. And even though the story in this film is very cliche, I still absolutely love this movie and find everything about it so memorable and rewatchable. For example, all of the kills in this movie are awesome, creative, and really fun. People get stabbed with icicles, impaled like a shish kebab, hung on ski lifts, and one of my personal favorites, stabbed in the head with an ice pick, and then hidden inside of a snowman. I also love the setting and location of this movie. Snowy slashers are always fun because of the snowy scenery, but then you also have the abandoned ski lodge, which is very eerie since it's dark and abandoned. But then other times when they have the fireplace going, it looks oddly cozy. There's also a couple scenes in a bar, and the whole place is covered with Christmas lights, garland, and Santa decorations. And even though the soundtrack of this film is mainly super early 2000s bands that sound like they're ripping off Blink 182, there are a couple Christmas songs as well. I don't know what else to say about this movie. It might be a little cheesy, but it has badass kills, an awesome location, great snowy atmosphere, and is just an overall very memorable slasher film. So if you want a fun, old school style slasher to watch around the holidays when there's lots of snow and cold weather, then I recommend watching Shredder. Stab 3. Holiday Horror. Casey returns home to prove her brother's innocence after he was convicted of a brutal killing spree. But she begins to question whether or not there is no place like home for the holidays when he escapes from prison and a new wave of murders begin. So this is a Scream fan film, or as the title would suggest, a stab fan film. And I don't often watch fan films besides the really high quality ones like Friday the 13th, Never Hike Alone, or It's Me, Billy, a Black Christmas fan film. And this definitely doesn't have the same type of budget as those fan films, but I love the idea of a Christmas-themed Scream movie. And once I saw Ghostface dressed up as Santa Claus, I knew I had no choice but to give this movie a chance. And even though this movie doesn't have the best production quality, it was actually a really great, fun, entertaining movie. First thing I would like to say is that this movie is very accurate to the Scream franchise, especially in terms of how the characters talk to each other or interact with Ghostface. And I was very shocked by how spot on this interpretation of Ghostface was. I don't know if they got a professional voice actor to do an impression of Ghostface, or if they used some type of voice filter or something, but the voice of Ghostface sounds exactly like Roger L. Jackson, who has always voiced the iconic character in all of the films. When you think about Ghostface wearing a Santa costume, you would probably imagine it to look pretty silly. But it's not like he's just wearing a Santa hat with a fake beard or something ridiculous like that. It's basically a replica of the cloak that Ghostface always wears. But instead of the whole thing being solid black, it's red with white trimmings. So it actually looks pretty badass and very professionally made. Also, Ghostface has some great lines in this movie, and some of them even put a festive twist on some of his most iconic lines. Like instead of him saying, "Do you like scary movies? What's your favorite scary movie?" He says, "Do you like Christmas movies? What's your favorite Christmas movie?" There's also one really funny scene where Ghostface is singing Dashing Through the Snow while chasing someone outside with a snow shovel, and I thought that was absolutely hilarious. It's also worth mentioning all of the characters in this film are original characters, created especially for the Stab fan films. So it's not like anyone is pretending to be Sidney Prescott or Gale or Dewey or anything like that. And I surprisingly really enjoyed a lot of the characters in this movie. The main girl, Casey, was an independent, fearless badass. And her two friends, Wyatt and Adrian, were probably my favorite characters in the movie. They were super funny and adorable, but also really brave when things got serious. And something that made me really happy and I really appreciated is that this movie has tons of LGBTQ representation. And possibly my favorite part about this whole movie is how incredible the Christmas atmosphere is. I watch so many Christmas horror movies, and there's so many that are lacking the Christmas spirit. But this movie has absolutely every Christmassy thing you can imagine. It's constantly snowing. People go Christmas shopping at the mall, wrap presents, bake cookies, watch Christmas movies, go to Christmas parties, and all of the characters wear Christmas pajamas, Christmas costumes, and fancy Christmas outfits. And of course, the decorations are everywhere. Christmas lights, Christmas trees, tinsel, garland, wreaths, mistletoe, candy canes, gift boxes, and everything else you can imagine. This is honestly one of the most Christmassy looking Christmas horror movies I've ever seen. It's just drenched in Christmas spirit and holiday atmosphere. There's also some awesome references to other horror franchises, such as Chucky, Psycho, and Black Christmas. Honestly, the only negative thing I have to say about this movie is that the kills aren't great. They use a lot of CGI blood, and I always hate when any movie uses CGI blood. I just think it always looks bad. And so unfortunately, most of the kills in this movie come across as pretty cheesy. But there are a couple creative kills that I really enjoyed, like someone getting stabbed with an icicle or impaled by a broken bong. But honestly, this film is 1,000 times better than I imagined it would be. And I cannot believe that this film does not have one single review on YouTube. Because even though this film doesn't have a big budget or a super high production value, it's still a very well made and cleverly written film. You can tell people put a lot of hard work and effort into making a Christmas themed horror movie that they knew fans of Scream would love. This is a fan film that I absolutely adore. So if you love Scream and scary Christmas movies, I highly recommend checking out Stab 3, Holiday Horror, Werewolf Santa. After witnessing Santa Claus get bitten by a werewolf, amateur monster hunter Lucy and her family set out to save Christmas. So this is a very low-budget, found-footage, horror comedy creature feature. And it actually reminded me a lot of the movie Dash Cam. It's about a girl named Lucy who is obsessed with comic books and makes vlogs on YouTube trying to hunt down monsters. And while visiting her parents for Christmas and searching for werewolves in the area, she stumbles upon the real Santa Claus, who immediately gets bitten by a werewolf and transforms into one himself. And even though that's a pretty silly idea for a movie, I think Santa Claus getting turned into a werewolf is actually a very unique and original idea for a story. So like I said, this film is extremely low budget. So if you aren't into low budget indie films, then obviously you aren't gonna enjoy this movie. But I actually had a lot of fun with this film. I thought visually it looked really good and well shot. The camera quality was much higher than I expected from a low budget film, and all of the actors did a really good job. Also, this movie is absolutely hilarious. There were several moments that I had to rewind because I was laughing so hard at what the characters had said. This movie may be low budget, but it has an awesome concept and a sweet story about a family forced to get along and work together in order to save Christmas. So if you like found footage horror comedies, pour yourself some eggnog or grab a can of Fanta, then sit back and watch Werewolf Santa. And now, the number one movie on my list, and one of the best underrated Christmas horror movies of all time is Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension. Ryan, his wife Emily, and their 7-year-old daughter Leela prepare for Christmas in their new home. But after finding an old and mysterious camcorder, Ryan quickly learns that it can record strange apparitions that are invisible to the naked eye. And when young Leela starts talking to her imaginary friend and displaying strange behavior, the family soon realizes they are being stalked and tormented by a sinister, supernatural entity. So I know I've already talked about this movie before in my first ever Christmas horror video, but just about a year ago I discovered that there's a special extended version of this movie, with about 15 minutes of extra scenes. Plus, on the Blu-ray, there's over 20 minutes of discovered footage, which is basically just the found footage equivalent of deleted scenes. So between the extended version of the movie and the deleted scenes, there's about 35 minutes of new footage added to this film. And since this is one of my favorite films in the Paranormal Activity franchise, I really wanted to talk about it again. The biggest addition to the extended cut of this film is the inclusion of Santa Claus. Basically, Ryan's brother reveals that when he packed his bag to come stay with them for the holidays, he decided to bring their dad's old Santa costume. And I knew right away something creepy was going to happen involving that Santa costume. I just wasn't sure what exactly. But one night, when the family hears strange noises and the lights go out, you see a shadowy figure, and although you can't fully see it, it's clearly the silhouette of Santa Claus. There's also mysterious noises coming from the chimney. And later on in the movie, the creepy little girl Lila keeps repeating over and over again, "Santa is here, Santa is here." And I personally found that part to be horrifying. And there's another part where the adults are searching all over the house trying to figure out what's happening. And we see glimpses of someone or something dressed up as Santa Claus. We only ever see them from the waist down, and their face is never revealed, but it seems to me as though maybe the demonic entity is using the Santa costume as some type of disguise to make friends with the little girl, so he can convince her to do his evil bidding. And along with all that, there's also a wind-up Santa Claus toy and a wind-up snowman toy. And throughout the whole film, they keep mysteriously going off by themselves. But besides all the creepy, Christmassy things I just mentioned, we also see the characters doing all of the classic, cozy family Christmas traditions, including putting up Christmas lights, wrapping presents, decorating the tree, and making cookies. Not to mention that the whole house is beautifully covered in Christmas decor. I know most people hate this movie, but I believe it's solely because of the decision they made to finally show the demons, and not just continue to have them be an invisible entity, like in all the previous films. But with this being the final film that was set within the continuity of the original, I feel like it was a smart decision to finally reveal the true form of the demons. It feels like after watching all these movies, we finally get a great payoff at the end by having the reveal of the demons. And I actually really loved the design of the demons. I thought they were very unique, memorable, and extremely eerie. So if you're searching for more Christmas-themed found footage horror movies that will capture your attention, then I definitely recommend watching Paranormal Activity, The Ghost Dimension. Well, everybody, my list is done. I hope you have some holiday fun. I'll be back next year with more festive films infused with fear. Enjoy these movies that are scary and filled with fright, and I hope that your Christmas is merry and bright.